try to get you settled.
Sure. This is the John Hinkle cabin in Rushing, Arkansas. It's right on the Stone Van Buren County line on Highway 9. Built in 1873, 150 years ago by John Hinkle. People have been living in it for many years. The last resident was actually here in the 1980s, so it was used not too long ago. All the chinking was gone. The place was a real mess, so I've been hired to fix it up, chink it, do whatever I can to save it. Perfect. All right, tools you're going to need for chinking either an old cabin or even a new one as well. You're going to need batter boards. This is my small batter board. You'll see me use that in a little while. The big batter board is just to catch mortar that falls out so it doesn't get lost. It's valuable stuff. You need several trowels. You need a large triangular trowel. You'll also need a small triangular trowel like this. These are a couple of margin trowels. They're really handy, especially the 2-inch margin trowel. You'll see me use that a lot here in a little while. Got a nice big socket slick for cleaning up logs. On a new cabin, you probably won't need something like this. But on this old cabin where I had a lot of rot to take care of, I use this thing to chisel out the rot. I've also got a smaller one. You're definitely going to need some shears. These are way too big, but it's what I've got, so I'm using it. Crowbar for pulling nails that get in the way. This is a little tool for pulling out the lath. You'll see me do that in a little while, and you can look at it and see how it's constructed. I've made a lot of these because I seem to lose them pretty regularly. You're going to need a tape measure, some paper to write on. And this fine item here came from Harbor Freight. It's an air stapler, and boy, does it work great. It changed my life when I got that. Ready? You're also going to need a skill saw to do it the way I do it. Don't forget your ear protection, and absolutely your eye protection. Got this from the pandemic. I've got a big box of them. They're pretty handy to have. First thing we're going to do for this chinking is to cut some lath. We'll have to measure it in a little while, but I wanted to show this table I made. I just threw it together out of some boards. 2 wide boards with a crack down the middle right here. I made some measurements here, 1-inch, 2-inch, 3-inch, and 4-inch from the crack. We'll use our metal cutting blade to cut the lath. You'll see me do that in just a minute. When I got ready to do my cabin, I've looked at some stuff called perma-chink that I saw advertised in a log home magazine. It's supposed to be really neat. It's flexible. It moves with the logs. It's some kind of plastic stuff. It's not guaranteed for very long. So what I decided to do is just use cement mortar. It works great. It's cheap, and what holds it in is this plasterer's lath. It's called plasterer's or stucco lath. It's cheap. You get a 2x8 sheet of it for 10 or 20 bucks. All right, we can see right in here, we got to fill this gap, but we only need to fill it from here to here. So that's about 2 inches. So it's 2 inches here. It's really 2 is going to work all the way across on this. On some of these, I'll measure it like this one here was 1.5 inches, and in 4 feet, it changed to, I think, about 3.5 inches, yeah. So you'll see how we cut that in just a minute. This lath comes in 2 foot by 8 foot sheets. I cut them in half. 8 foot is too much to deal with, so just make yourself a 4-foot sheet. That's easy enough. Now, since I know we need a 2-incher, I'm putting my 2-inch mark right here. Now, we're working without power here, so bear with me while I start the generator. Our 2-inch piece. This is where this socket slick comes in pretty handy for cleaning up the logs before you put in this lath. I'm just kind of running it along here, taking the loose stuff out. This is kind of overkill with this big socket slick, but there have been a lot of places in this cabin where I had a lot of rot to deal with. And here's why. Long ago, when the chinking had already fallen out and wasn't around anymore, they took 1x6s and nailed them across here. It wasn't so bad under the porches here, but out on the exposed walls, water got in between the 1x6s and the logs, and it caused a lot of rot. So I had a lot to carve out with this slick before I got ready to go to work. But I'm just using it to take the loose stuff off. There was actually even a lot of bark between these logs. He just left the bark on. I think back in 1873, well, John was in a hurry to get his family moved in for the winter. That's going to work just fine. This is where your gloves are going to come in handy. They might call this stuff plasterer's lath, but myself and some friends refer to it as blood lath, because I've lost a lot of blood because of this stuff. Something I learned about lath. This lath, if you run your hand down it, it's smooth one way and it's rough the other. So you want it so the smooth side is on the down side. So it's smooth this way. It holds the mortar in better that way. All right. All right, see what I've got here? I can push this up in here like this. Whoop, a little far. No, that'll be fine. You definitely want to get it in to the bark side of the log. Usually, quarter to half an inch up in there is pretty good. I do the bottom first, and that's when the stapler comes in. I put a staple in, every 3 inches or so. If you need to, you can push it up a little bit. It's really a joy to work with these old logs. They're beautifully hewn. Old John took a broad axe. They drug these trees out of the woods. There were a lot bigger trees here at that time. There was virgin timber, but of course it was too big to deal with. So they selected these logs that ran 10, 12 inches in diameter. The way we've done this, cut this lath, has worked fine because it was a 2-inch cut all the way across. It isn't always that way, especially if you're working with logs that have knots in them. So that's when your shears come in handy, because you got to work your way. Let's see if there's anywhere where I did that here. Well, of course it gets wider here as it goes up to the top. These logs didn't have a lot of knots, but sometimes you'll have big dips, and you just have to take your shears and cut that out. Here you can see where it gets wider as I go. This is also one of those places where I had to cut a lot of route out. I must have taken 1 inch of wood out right here, and I used that big socket slick for that. It's a pretty handy tool. Whether you're building a new house or restoring an old one, I recommend getting you a nice big socket slick. This is where our little tool comes in handy. It's got several uses, but here I have a long stretch up to where the wood is. So I bend that back. I use this to hold it out. There we go. And we're going to pull this out a little bit in the middle. And you'll see why when I start mudding. The shape of my mud, I want it to come out a little bit in the middle. Be kind of dome shaped. So I use this tool to pull this out. But it has another purpose as well, because if there's a place where you forgot to put some staples, and that will happen, you'll find it when you do this, which is a lot better than finding it when you've got a trowel full of mud and you're trying to put it on, because then you have to drop everything and get your stapler going again. So I've got to replace this piece right here, or put a piece in here. It's about 23 inches. It tapers from, this is about 3.5 right here to 4 here. And then see, here's one of those knots I was talking about where it drops down. So we're going to take care of that right now. Let's cut a new piece of lath. Generator time again. I'll start the generator. Okay, here's where we're going to cut. We're going to cut this lath. First of all, I check it and make sure this is the smooth side here. It's rough going up, smooth coming down. That's what we want. And we just kind of eyeball this. Looks good. There we go.
Looks good.
If you're building your own house, try not to have gaps like this. 3-inch, 2.5, 3-inch gaps is really ideal for mudding. These big gaps, it's really hard to get the mortar to stay in there. I think it's time to mix some mud. Let's do it. So along with our masonry mix, I'm putting in a little bit of lime. As you can see, I'm not measuring it out too well. That'll work right there. What the lime does is it adds a little more plasticity to the cement, and it also whitens the mortar up a little bit. And I think in a log cabin like this, you want your mortar as light as you can get it. It just looks good that way. I'm going to mix that in. Contrary to popular belief, you don't need a cement mixer to mix this stuff.
The nice thing about using a lot of water right off the bat is it just makes it easier to mix it up. It's real struggle when it gets dry. And I'll be working this when we get to the end of it.
On this cabin, this is probably the 15th or 16th time I've done this. The bags of mortar weigh 80 pounds each. So we've got over 1,000 pounds of mortar in this structure. Okay, we're getting a pretty good consistency now. That's about what we want it to be like. And you'll see, when we start trialing it, you'll see what I mean. There's a fine line between too wet and too dry. And it's probably a pint of water makes the difference. I always say about cement, any kind of cement or mortar, you can work it with one tool today, but tomorrow you have to use a different tool, like a hammer. Before I start, I'm going to get my batter board wet. You're always going to lose mortar as you work, so I put a board down here to catch the mortar because I hate to waste that stuff. It's expensive. I work this mortar a little bit into what I call turds for obvious reason. That's a good consistency of mortar too. That's really going to be perfect for today. Before I finish here, I'll be adding water to it though, because it's going to be drying out, especially in this heat. Try to get a pretty good collection of these turds. That'll do for now. Get my trowels together. What the notch we're working on right now is actually a really thin one. It was John and his wife, and I think they had 4 kids when they came here, and then they had 2 more that were born in this cabin. And there's a guy named Wendell Hinesley who's still alive. He lives in Pekin, Illinois now. And he was born in here also, much later, generations later. Another thing about this mortaring, this trowel work, there we go. You always do the top one last, because the mortar tends to fall away, especially when it's wet mortar like this. It tends to fall away from the upper log. So if you do that part last, it pushes it up and bonds it with that log. And then all it has to do is dry like that, and it'll be there forever. There we go. That looks pretty good. I used to do this with this trowel, like this. Get a bunch of mortar on there, squeeze it in there. It actually goes a little quicker this way. It's not bad when your joints are thin like this, but when you get into thick joints, the mortar tends to fall out of there. And I just got tired of losing mortar, so I went to the margin trowel. Although, as you can see, it's quicker in this kind of joint to use the big trowel. We may do that for a while here now. Okay, trim that, hit the top one more time, and done. Had a big gap to fill right here, so I stuffed a bunch of that plaster's lath up in there just to help hold it all together. You have to have a lot of mortar. You can't just use a little bit of mortar. It's in volume that it has strength. And it also has to be pushed into that plaster's lath. And you can look in here, you see what that mortar does in that lath. See, it squeezes through, expands a little bit on the other side, and when it sets up, it's not going anywhere. And I'm pushing pretty hard with this trowel when I do this to get it squished in there. And there's a little bit of my lath right there. So I'll just add a little more mortar to it. Go. I actually love doing this. It's kind of, you get a chance to be a little artistic, I guess.